Hello there, everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. And before we get into today's video, I'd like to remind you about the existence of Quarter, which is my open source alt-tech alternative to YouTube and other lying grifter video sharing sites in the alt-tech world. Quarter, as a website, has a similar user interface to YouTube, and it has a lot of the same features that you'd expect to find on YouTube. HD video uploads, live streaming, free restreaming, public playlists, and all manner of goodies, including some new features that either are not on YouTube, like an insight currency called Quarter Bucks that allows you to promote your videos and channel as at your leisure instead of us making the decision to promote or not promote your channel. And there's also live video chat rooms where you can basically have video chats with people, and if you so choose, you can live stream to your channel from these chat rooms. So if you're looking for a video sharing site that is feature rich, has a nice user interface, and champions freedom of speech in action as well as in word, then I would recommend that you join Quarter today. And if you're a creator, be sure to start uploading your content to Quarter and start promoting Quarter today. With that being said, let's get right into the subject matter of today's video, which is this recent article that was put out by MSNBC, archived of course. As you can see on the screen, the title of the article is "Why America Needs a New Kind of Atheism Right Now." And when you get into the actual article, you read, "There are two pressing crises tied to the state of religion in America today. A new style of atheism can help answer both of them. The first crisis is rooted in an excess of religion. Christian theocracy is not a far-off specter, but an emerging reality in America." Ooh, so spooky. How do we come to this conclusion? Fueled by a radically reactionary Supreme Court that is two-thirds Catholic, Thomas Jefferson's already dilapidated and graffitied wall of separation between church and state is crumbling. So we got the tired old wall of separation between church and state. What this person and many people like him are trying to convince you is that when Thomas Jefferson talked about a wall of separation between church and state, he was saying that we couldn't have religion basically governing the state or being promoted by the state in any kind of way, shape, and form. So no prayers in public schools, no 10 commandments posted on the walls of classrooms, no Bibles distributed in schools by the federal government and its funding. None of that. Nope, can't have any of that. Of course, when you actually study history, you see that in Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, he told them specifically that the First Amendment was a wall of separation between church and state that would prevent the government from regulating freedom of expression in terms of religion, because that's what the Danbury Baptist Association was expressing to Thomas Jefferson. They were concerned that the way the First Amendment was worded would allow the government to regulate religious expression, and Thomas Jefferson was reassuring them that the government could not regulate religious expression because of the First Amendment, and that's what he meant when he said that the First Amendment was a wall of separation between church and state. Of course, the governing authorities in more recent decades decided to completely reverse that meaning. They made the phrase wall of separation between church and state by Thomas Jefferson to mean the opposite of what he meant. And they have regulated religious expression in this country for a long time. So when you got a Supreme Court that's getting back to the way things were in the time of Thomas Jefferson and going along with what he said the First Amendment was supposed to be and what he meant by wall of separation between church and state, you find stuff being overturned that should rightfully be overturned. But the paragraph we're reading gets funnier. The overturning of Roe v. Wade means the lives of women across the country are being held hostage by a conservative Christian conception of life. Actually, babies are being saved from being murdered. And by the way, you want to talk about Roe v. Wade being overturned, Aleem? Let's talk about infant homicide laws or infantile homicide laws, whatever they're called. Most states in this country, if not all, have some form of infant homicide law where if you murder an unborn child outside of an abortion clinic, you can actually be brought up on murder charges. There have been numerous stories over the years in blue states as well as red states where people have been charged with double murder for murdering a pregnant woman. One murder charge being for the mother and the other murder charge being for the unborn child in her womb. It's only inside an abortion clinic where you can murder an unborn child inside a mother's womb and not get charged with murder. Abortion is nothing more than legalized child murder. It's nothing more than a legal loophole that allows people to get away with murdering children in a specific circumstance when they would get charged with murder for murdering unborn children in any other circumstance. And then Aleem writes, Kennedy versus Burr-Emberton permits school officials to publicly pray and make students feel pressure to join in. I believe this is referring to the case with the football coach praying with his players after games. There's actually nothing wrong with that because when a football game or any other outdoor sporting event or sporting event on a school property ends, if it's outside the normal school hours of operation, that property becomes public property just as much as a park does, and people can pray as much as they want on public property. If a coach wants to pray after a game, he's free to do so because that property is no longer a school property when it's outside of school hours and a sporting event put on by the school is not being held. When the school event ends and it's outside of school hours, school property becomes public property. So there's actually nothing wrong with a school coach praying on the field after a football game. There's nothing wrong with his players praying with him if they want to. Absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Article continues. Carson versus Mackin allows taxpayer dollars to be used to fund religious education. And guess what, Aleem? That is right in line with the founding of our country. If you read my first book, Another Inconvenient Truth, I actually discuss and analyze a case where Congress literally voted to use taxpayer money to create a particular translation of the Bible and distribute it to public schools. And this was within, I think, the first 10 years of the United States existing as a nation. So this idea that tax dollars can't be used to fund religious education in any way, shape, and form is an absolute load of crap. Our Congress, in its original years, literally funded the creation of a Bible translation that was allowed to then be distributed to public schools all across the country. And at the state level, Republican-led legislatures have invoked Christianity as they pursue a systematic assault on transgender rights, while abortion abolitionists convince some Louisiana lawmakers that people who get abortions should be charged with homicide. And guess what, Aleem? They should be charged with homicide, because right now, in this country, including in blue states like California, if you murder an unborn child outside of an abortion clinic, you can get brought up on a murder charge for that unborn child. As I've explained in a recent video that I did, if you murder a pregnant woman outside of an abortion clinic, you actually get charged with double murder, which implies that the unborn child in her womb is actually a human person, because you can't get charged with murder if it's not a human person. But then, all of a sudden, when that unborn child gets inside an abortion clinic, it magically transforms from a human person to a non-human, non-person that it's okay to kill inside the mother's womb. Fetal homicide laws contradict abortion laws regarding whether or not an unborn child is actually a human person or not. So until you're ready to have a discussion about the fetal homicide laws in this country and how they basically prove that abortion is nothing more than a legal loophole that allows you to get away with murdering children in the womb, Well, you're not ready to have a real conversation unless you're ready to deal with fetal homicide laws. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot have unborn children be non-human, non-persons in one situation, and in all other situations they are human persons that you're not allowed to murder. You can't have it both ways, Aleem. And then he skipped down to this paragraph where Aleem writes, "The second crisis is tied ironically to the decline of religion. The religious right is securing more power in courts and legislatures and becoming more influential within right-wing culture, but it's not becoming more popular. Instead, there has been an accelerating American drift away from organized religion, and most often toward nothing in particular. A rapidly increasing share of Americans are detaching from religious communities that provide purpose and forums for moral contemplation, and not necessarily finding anything in their stead. They're dropping out of church, and survey data suggests they're disproportionately likely to be checked out from civic life. Their trajectory tracks with a broader decades-long trend of secular life defined by plunging social trust, faith in institutions, and participation in civil society." So, in other words, the decline of religion in general is the second crisis, and it's causing people to basically check out of life. They don't want to be involved with much of anything, and they're miserable and alone, and they don't really feel particularly motivated to do anything meaningful. But that's the natural consequence of atheism, ladies and gentlemen. For the last 110 years plus, the powers that be have been telling people that the biblical worldview is false, and that there is no resurrection of the dead performed by Jesus back in the first century. And they want you to believe that atheism is true, and that evolution is true, and billions of years is true, and that Big Bang cosmology is true. And what follows from those things being true is that there is no objective moral standard outside the human mind by which to judge things as right or wrong, good or evil. And because there is no objective standard to judge any of this by, this means that everything is subjective. There is no objective truth or objective wrong. There is no objective evil or objective good. If atheism is true, there's nothing objective that really exists outside the human mind. Everything is a construct either of an individual mind or a group of minds among the human race. There is no outside force or outside mind that crafted moral standards that judge things in an objective sense. None of that's true if atheism is true. But what is this new atheism that Aleem has for us? My belief is that an energetic, organized atheist movement, which I purpose calling communitarian atheism, would provide an effective way to guard against the twin crises of intensifying religious extremism on one end and the atomizing social consequences of a plunge in conventional religiosity on the other. An organized atheist community can help agitate for and finance a secularist equivalent of the Federalist Society, the right-wing legal movement that helped populate the federal courts with hard-right jurists and helped us get into this mess, to act as a bulwark against theocracy. There has been zero, and I mean zero, innovation in the doctrine of separation of church and state in the last 50 years. Jacques Learned Blau, a scholar at Georgetown University and the author of Secularism, The Basics, told me. Atheists who consciously believe in their worldview have a particular urgent interest in helping to lead a legal and political movement to protect against theocracy. Translation: instead of legislating the morality of the biblical worldview, we must legislate the atheist morality across this country. See, the problem is that everyone wants to legislate their morality. Everyone does. And you can't not legislate morality. No matter what laws you make, you're legislating someone's morality. The question is, whose morality should we legislate things by? The atheists want to have their morality legislated on all of us. And there's a lot of people in this country who really don't want to have atheist morality legislated on us, especially since atheism does not provide an objective moral standard outside the human mind by which to judge things as objectively right or objectively wrong or objectively true. It's a shifting quicksand pit that is always fluctuating. There is no stability in an atheist worldview, so we don't really want an atheist morality to be governing our land. At the same time, atheism can address the social and spiritual vacuum emerging in the wake of the slow death of mainstream organized religion. This requires learning from religion, not indiscriminately attacking it. By putting together study groups, communities for secular meditation, and elucidating the meaning and joys of atheism without spewing venom toward all religion, atheists can build spaces for religion-skeptical people to find purpose, think about ethics, form community, and consider more carefully how to build a better society. The meaning and joys of atheism? Are you kidding me, Aleem? There is no meaning and joy in atheism. Everything is subjective in atheism, if it's true. Everything's subjective. There's no objective meaning. There's no objective joy that is provided to you by the atheistic worldview. You literally make it up as you go. That's how atheism works. Whatever the ruling class that is currently in power has to say, that is the meaning. And that is the joy. But as soon as someone else takes power and they have a different meaning and different definition of joy, suddenly that's the meaning and that's the joy. Atheism does not provide any objective meaning or joy in life. None. As a matter of fact, all we have to do is observe the atheist community, and I don't see a lot of meaning or joy. I see a lot of them, especially on the internet, spending all their waking time bashing Christians, bashing young earth creationists, bashing and screwing over anyone who disagrees with them in even the slightest way. The natural reaction of an atheist is to become a woke far leftist. The two go hand in hand. There's no joy or meaning in atheism. We can see that just by observing your movement, observing your population, basically. Aleem continues, I was raised in a Muslim household in the U.S., but I turned away from Islam in my teens after a fateful conversation with my grandfather one hot summer day in Pakistan. My grandfather was a professor who delighted in thrashing me in chess and asking me vexing questions. And he once posed to me a version of what the Columbia University philosopher Philip Kitcher has called the argument from symmetry. He questioned why I adhered to Islam in particular when so many religions made claims about the existence of gods, some of which fairly similar to Islam, some radically different. I froze, with no basis on which to distinguish between the validity of these various claims about the supernatural. By definition, I could not know or prove which God was the right one. I quickly confessed that my religiosity was a mere accident of birth. So Aleem here says that he cannot know or prove which God is the right one. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a load of hooey. When you read the Bible, God claims that he causes the universe to expand. He also claims that he is holding all of reality together by his word. And we see this confirmed scientifically. We know for a fact that the universe is expanding. We've known that for almost 100 years, thanks to Hubble's telescope and what we observed back then and what we've confirmed since then. As far as we can tell, the universe actually is expanding. When you read the Bible, what you see the God of the Bible claim is that he's causing the universe to expand and that he's holding all of reality together by his word. Now, what does that propose? That proposes that if we observe reality, we should see the universe expanding. And we should see something that indicates that everything is being held together by some unknown force. That is what we would expect to see in reality if the claims that God makes about him causing the universe to expand and him holding everything together is true. Well, guess what, guys? It is a scientific fact that the universe is expanding. And there's also something in science called the anthropic principle, which suggests that if certain factors in the observable reality were to change in even the slightest way, that basically life in this universe and on this earth would cease to exist. It's almost like there's some unknown force holding everything together in particular parameters in such a way so that life, especially on Earth, can exist. Now, there are some problems with the anthropic principle that don't take into account the fact that if something were to change, God could just adjust other things to make everything stay alive. But the anthropic principle does prove that there is something holding all of reality in place, generally speaking, so that life continues to exist. And science has confirmed that the universe is expanding. Things that we would expect to see in reality if it was true that God is causing the universe to expand, and if it's true that he's holding all of reality together by his word. So the God of the Bible can actually be proven scientifically because he claims to have effects on this reality that we should be able to observe, and we have been able to observe. So scientifically, we know that the God of the Bible actually exists, which means that none of the other gods do. In the next paragraph, we read, "Losing my religion was an unexpected moment of ecstasy. I no longer blamed myself for not understanding the emptiness I had felt when praying to a god. I also finally felt comfortable interrogating Islam as a vehicle for social conservatism and patriarchy. I knew the claim that a god exists could not be proven or disproven, but I could not believe in one, especially as traditionally understood in the major monotheistic faiths, without evidence or resolution of questions like the problem of evil, and so I became an atheist." So, even though you can't prove a god doesn't exist, Aleem, you saw the problem of evil as something that can't be solved, and so you became an atheist. So the existence of evil and suffering in the world is why you became an atheist. The problem of evil is an obstacle for a lot of people when it comes to accepting the biblical worldview because it's an emotional problem that appeals very strongly to their emotions. And once that's done, it's really hard to get them to come back to a place of logic and reason in order to see that the problem of evil really isn't a problem. Because you see, in order for evil to exist in any objective sense, you have to have an objective standard of good. And in order to have an objective standard of good that exists outside of the human mind, in order to have an objective definition of evil and therefore a real problem of evil, you need a creator God of some kind. If there's no creator God, then not only is there no such thing as objective good, there's also no such thing as an objective evil. What you consider evil and to be the problem of evil, someone else or some other group of people consider to be good. And what you consider to be good, those groups consider to be evil. The problem of evil is not a problem at all if atheism is true. But someone like Aleem is not capable of doing critical thinking like that because he's an emotional thinker who was not exposed to proper biblical apologetics. And he made the mistake of being a Muslim, which when you're part of a false religion that has a God at the center of it, and you find out that that religion is not true and that particular God doesn't exist, there's a tendency to go scorched earth and claim that all concepts of God are false. And throughout history, this is just not true. But if you also look at history, it kind of makes sense that all other gods are false, because you see, the kings and the rulers of the biblical times understood, like we do today, that most gods are constructs made up by people in order to control the minds of the masses. And so they didn't really feel threatened by other gods, or they saw other gods as tools to control people. So whenever the God of the Bible would intervene in a situation as recorded in the Bible, the rulers that were seeing this and observing this intervention of God were always shocked and always surprised, because here you had an instance of a particular God actually existing and actually intervening in human history and time and space. They're so used to dealing with gods that don't exist that when the one true God who does exist shows himself and reveals himself in a way that cannot be denied, they're always in shock and awe, even if they refuse to accept and worship this God. Because you see, one God does exist, none of the others don't, and so when the one true and living God actually shows up and intervenes in a situation, there's always shock and awe. Always. Always shock and awe on the part of the people experiencing it, especially if they're authority figures or rulers of some kind. Now, we're going to read the first half of this next paragraph, and then I think we're done. Some people think of atheists as rudderless and living in a cold, meaningless world. My experience was the opposite. Atheism enlivened me and spurred me to develop a broader skepticism of all manner of received wisdom. The displacement of heaven inspired me to think about achieving utopia on earth. My reading skewed in a radically left-wing direction, and I pivoted toward political activism. So, atheism, in reality, does produce a cold and meaningless world because that's what atheism teaches, ultimately speaking. But somehow, atheism gave Aleem a whole new meaning, and it caused him to question all manner of received wisdom. In other words, question everything. Anything that's perceived of as objectively true, question everything. Except for atheism and evolution and billions of years and Big Bang cosmology and anything that the far left tells you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So question everything and we'll just make a utopia on Earth. And he admits that he decided to go in a radically left-wing direction with his reading and his political activism. In other words, atheism is a direct pipeline to woke leftism, just like I said earlier. And here Aleem admits that. So Aleem's new version of atheism really isn't any different than the old version of atheism if you think about it. Because if you read the article, he goes on to talk about how the new atheists like the Richard Dawkins and the Richard Hitchens and Christopher Hitchens and all of them, etc., how basically they made good arguments against religion, but the way they dehumanized religious people, basically turned religious people away from atheism and would never consider atheism as a legitimate worldview because of the horrible behavior of atheists. In order to get religious people to deconvert from their religion and into atheism, Aleem is basically saying in this article that we need to be kind to them and we need to learn from religious people and we can't just indiscriminately attack them and not take their personal feelings and their thoughts and whatnot into consideration. So in other words, we need to be really nice and endearing to them, and we need to endear them into our worldview by being super nice people and not putting them down simply for having a different worldview than us. But that's the exact way that Christians have been taught to convert people into the faith for years. Basically, you can't just browbeat someone because they're not a Christian and expect them to convert to your faith. You have to convert them by presenting evidence supporting the biblical worldview, but you also have to treat them kindly and nicely, and you can't dehumanize them, you can't belittle them, you can't treat them the way atheists treat us in order to deconvert them. That's the common knowledge wisdom that's presented to us by Christians. Atheists are basically telling themselves, and have been for years, that that's the only way we're going to convert religious people. And that is true to some extent. I mean, if you followed my drama with the Utah Outcasts years ago, they actually made a video attacking me and claimed that I was a liar simply because I was a young earth creationist. But half of the video where they called me a liar was one of their hosts explaining to them why they shouldn't just be calling me a liar indiscriminately and dehumanizing me simply for being a young earth creationist. And they pointed out that if the other hosts of the show treated me like this, that there was zero chance I would ever deconvert from my worldview and convert into theirs. And that host was absolutely right and is still right to this day. But the problem for me, as far as they go, is that atheists are incapable of converting me to their worldview, because when you actually examine the atheistic worldview and what it teaches, you find out that it cannot be proven by science any more than the biblical worldview can in terms of its origin story. And what I have found with most atheists is that most atheists don't realize that they held a worldview, a religion of sorts, and they behave just like religious people do. But as soon as you point this out to them, most of the time these atheists will attack you and dehumanize you and call and say to you all the worst things imaginable because you dared to point out something that they're blind to regarding their own worldview and faith. So I think if there's going to be a new atheism that comes out in the future, there needs to be a new atheism that acknowledges that atheism is a religion, is a worldview that makes claims about reality that cannot be proven through observational science or science at all. And basically, once atheists acknowledge that they have a worldview, and they acknowledge that we too have a worldview that's just different than theirs, then we can have more fruitful discussions about whose worldview is best supported by the evidence of what we observe in reality. But until atheists can acknowledge that they have a religion that they adhere to called atheism, until they can acknowledge and accept that, there will never be a fruitful discussion between religious people and atheists. Ever.